Earth stopped answering on a Tuesday, and for 9 years the galaxy treated that silence as a grave. Watch Marshal Tolan Vesh of the Sevenari Accord had been a junior listener on the night it happened. He remembered the moment the way other people remembered their own names. One heartbeat the blue world was a roar of signal, a million voices stacked on a million bands, the loudest single point in the whole spiral arm. The next heartbeat it was nothing, not jammed, not burned, just gone quiet, the way a room goes quiet when the last person in it has finally died. The listening stations called it the Great Stilling. The Accord's astronomers wrote 3,000 papers on it. The priests wrote songs. And the empires, all 40 of them, did the thing empires always do when a strong neighbor falls silent. They came to look at what was left. What was left, by every instrument the galaxy owned, was a tomb. Earth still turned, its weather still moved, its seas still threw light back at the dark. But nothing on it spoke, and nothing on it answered, and the few probes that crossed its orbit came back with the same flat reading every time. No power, no fleets, no defense grid. A dead garden spinning around an ordinary star, ringed by the quiet hulks of stations that had switched themselves off mid-sentence and never woken. Tolan had grown from a junior listener into a watch marshal across those 9 years, and in all that time, the single most certain fact in his service file was this: humanity was finished. Whatever had killed it had been thorough and silent and complete, and the only mercy in it was that it had been quick. He believed that fact the way he believed in gravity. He had reasons. The Accord did not hold beliefs the way smaller powers did, on faith or on fear. The Accord held beliefs on data, and the data on Earth was 9 years deep and 1,000 readings wide, and every single reading said the same thing. Tolan had personally signed off on 40 of those readings. He had sent the probes himself, in the early years, when the loss of the loud blue world still felt like a wound the whole arm shared. Each probe had crossed the dead garden's orbit and come back with the flat line. No power, no heat above the natural, no fleets, no grid, a world turning in its sleep around a yellow star, ringed by stations that had switched off mid-word, and never once, in 9 years, the faintest flicker of a voice. The Accord had even held a memorial. Tolan had stood at it, a junior officer in a hall full of grieving species, while the speakers said the things people say about the loud and the gone. They are at peace now. They went quickly. They did not suffer long. 40 empires had mourned humanity, and then 40 empires had moved on, the way the living always move on, and the blue world had become a thing you pointed at in the dark and said, "That one used to talk," before the silence took it. He believed it right up until the night the hollow choir came for the world called Tarn, and Earth, which had not made a sound in 9 years, opened one eye in the dark and looked at them. The thing that killed worlds did not arrive like a fleet. That was the first lesson the galaxy had failed to learn, and it had cost them 60 systems already. A fleet you could see. A fleet had engines and heat and a shape. The hollow choir had none of those. It came as a thinning, a patch of space where the stars behind it began, very gently, to go out. Not explode, not redshift, simply stop being there, one by one, swallowed by something that did not glow, and did not move, and did not, as far as any sensor could tell, exist at all, until it was already inside your orbit, and your sky had begun to feel wrong. The choir was alive. Everyone agreed on that much, because the dead do not hunger, and the choir was nothing but hunger given a shape too large to look at. It was not one creature. It was a colony of something, a drift of pale organic matter spread thin across light years, a single appetite wearing a billion bodies, and it ate the one thing every living world produced without meaning to. It ate sound. It ate signal. It ate the warm electric noise of a civilization talking to itself. And when a world had gone quiet enough, when the choir had drunk every voice out of it, the world simply stopped. Lights out. Heat gone. A garden turned to a still photograph of a garden. 60 worlds. 60 silences. The Accord had a map of them in the war room, and the map looked like a string of dark beads laid across the arm, and every bead had once been a song. Tolan had seen one die. Only one, and only from a distance, and only because the watch cruiser he served on in his 4th year had been too slow to reach it in time and too fast to look away. The world was called Salume, a small green accord colony of 2 million on the far edge of the trade lanes, and the choir had been on it for 3 days by the time the cruiser arrived. There had been no battle. There was never a battle. There was only the thinning in the sky above the colony, the patch of swallowed stars, and below it a world that was, hour by hour, going quiet. The cruiser had hung at the edge of the system, unable to approach, unable to help, and it had listened to Saloom die. That was the thing Tolan could never make anyone understand who had not heard it. The colony did not scream. There was no panic on the bands, no final desperate broadcasts, no last words. There was only the noise of a living world, the steady, warm electric chatter of 2 million people going about the business of being alive, and then, band by band, that noise going thinner, quieter. A conversation here cut off mid-sentence as the choir drank it. A music station fading not into static but into nothing. A network of voices that had been a roar narrowing to a murmur, and the murmur to a whisper, and the whisper to silence, until there was a green world below an empty sky that made no sound at all, and would never make a sound again, and looked, from the cruiser's scope, exactly like a photograph of a world that was still, somehow, slowly, turning. Tolan had been 26 years old. He had not slept well since, and he had carried from that day a private and unshakable conviction that there were 2 kinds of death in the galaxy, the loud kind that everyone feared, and the quiet kind that the choir brought, and that the quiet kind was infinitely worse, because it took from you not just your life but your voice, and left the universe with no record that you had ever spoken at all. Tolan stood in front of that map now, on the command deck of the watch cruiser Sevenfold Patience, and he watched the 61st bead begin to form over the world called Tarn. Tarn was a Sevenari world, 40 million people, a trade hub, an old one, all bridges and water and tall pale cities built up the sides of cliffs. It had asked the Accord for help 11 days ago, when its astronomers first noticed the stars going out at the edge of their system. The Accord had sent the Sevenfold Patience and 40 other ships, the largest force it had ever massed against the choir, and Tolan had brought them in fast and proud. Then he had seen the thinning up close, and the pride had drained out of him like water out of a cracked cup. You could not fight it. That was the truth nobody in the fleet would say out loud. You could shoot into the choir all day, and the shots simply vanished, eaten like everything else, and the pale drift came on at the same patient speed it always came, and the stars kept going out behind it, and the sky over Tarn kept getting wronger, and 40 million people on the cliffs looked up and saw their own death arriving, with no face to hate. The fleet would die here. Tolan knew it the way he had known Earth was dead. He had already begun composing the message he would send home, the one that started with the words, "It cannot be stopped," when his signals officer made a sound he had never heard her make before. It was not a word. It was the sound a person makes when the ground they are standing on turns out to be something else. "Marshal," she said, and her voice had gone strange and small. Something just answered the distress call. He turned. Tarn's planetary grid? No. She was staring at her board like it had bitten her. Tarn's grid is dead. The choir drank it 2 days ago. This is coming from outside the system. She swallowed. It's coming from a long way outside the system. Another Accord ship? No. She looked up at him, and he would remember her face for the rest of his life. "Marshal, the signal is 9 years old. It left its source 9 years ago, traveling the slow way, the dark way, under everything. It only just got here." She pressed a control, and the bridge speakers filled with a sound. It was not a voice. It was a tone, low and even, and absolutely steady, the kind of sound a thing makes when it has been holding still for a very long time and has decided to stop. Under the tone there was a string of numbers, a position, a heading, and a single line of old machine language that the translator chewed on for 3 full seconds before it gave them a meaning. The meaning was 4 words long. "We heard you. Hold. Where? Toland said. His mouth had gone dry. Where is the source? The signals officer brought the origin point up on the great map and traced the 9-year line back across all those light years, back across the dark, to the place where the message had begun its long, quiet journey toward Tarn. The line ended at a blue world ringed by silent stations, a dead garden spinning around an ordinary star, a tomb the whole galaxy had agreed on for 9 years. It ended at Earth. For a moment, nobody on the bridge breathed. Toland stared at the line and felt 9 years of certainty come apart in his chest, like wet paper. That world is dead, he said. He was not arguing with his officer. He was arguing with the map. We have 1,000 readings. There is no power on Earth. There is nothing on Earth. It went quiet 9 years ago, and it never came back. Yes, Marshal, the signals officer said quietly. It went quiet. She turned the long-range scope toward the blue world, the way you turn to look at a face you are afraid of, and the whole bridge crew gathered behind her to see what the dead garden was doing. For 9 years, Earth had given the galaxy nothing but stillness, a flat line, a held breath. Now, on the scope, the blue world was beginning to change, not loudly, not all at once, but across its night side, in long, slow lines, lights were coming on. And out past the silent stations, in the cold dark where the Accord's probes had found nothing for 9 years, the empty space around the dead garden was no longer empty. It was full of shapes, thousands upon thousands of shapes, gray and patient and waking, arranged in ranks that went on past the edge of the scope and kept going. Marshal, the signals officer whispered, there's something out there. There's a lot of something out there. Toland Vesh looked at the waking dark around the world he had spent 9 years calling a grave, and he understood, far too late, that he had read the silence exactly wrong. Earth had not died. Earth had gone quiet on purpose, and it had spent 9 years listening. On Earth, in a low concrete room under a hill that had once been a city, an old man named Asa Greer heard the world wake up around him and did not move from his chair. He was the only living person on the planet who had been awake for all 9 years. That was his job. That had always been his job, since the night the order came down and the whole of humanity made the hardest choice a species can make. Asa Greer was the caretaker, the one who stayed up while everyone else slept, the one who kept the long silence honest. The room around him filled with soft light as the systems came back, board after board, and each board carried the same patient tone he had been listening to alone for 9 years. He let it wash over him. He was 81 years old. His hands shook now in a way they had not shook when this began, but his eyes were clear, and they went straight to the one board that mattered, the great dark map of the arm, and the single red bead forming over the world called Tarn. There you are, he said to it. His voice was rough from disuse. Took you long enough to bite something that called for help. The thing he was looking at had a name in the human files, not a poetic one. The astronomers who had found it 9 years ago had been too frightened to be poetic. They had called it the Hollow Choir, because of what it did to a world's voice, and because of the one recording they had ever managed to make of it, a recording that no human being had been able to listen to twice. 9 years ago, the Hollow Choir had come for Earth. That was the thing the galaxy did not know. That was the thing 40 empires had spent 9 years failing to understand. The choir had not started its hunt at the rim. It had started at the loudest world in the arm, the blue garden that roared on 1,000,000 bands, because the choir went where the noise was, and there had been no louder noise anywhere than humanity talking to itself. It had come for Earth first, and Earth had seen it coming. The seeing had cost them. That was the part the human files recorded in careful, unsparing detail, because the humans believed that a lesson paid for in blood should never be allowed to grow comfortable. Earth had not gone quiet out of wisdom. Earth had gone quiet out of grief, after it had tried, the way every world tried, to fight. The first colony the choir took from humanity was a mining world called Bellwether, 40,000 people in a ring of stations around a cold sun. And when the thinning appeared in their sky, they did what any brave world does. they sent ships. 11 of them, the whole local defense squadron, and they fired everything they had into the pale drift, and the pale drift ate the fire and kept coming, and the 11 ships closed to point-blank range and fired again, and the drift ate that too, and then it drifted over the ships and drank their reactor song, and their comms and their warm electric voices, and 11 crews went quiet inside their hulls while their weapons still glowed, and Bellwether died with its guns hot, and its sky full of ships that no longer made a sound. The second colony was a research station called Highholm, and they had watched what happened to Bellwether, so they did not fight. They ran. They lit every engine they had and poured every voice into the dark calling for help, and fled at the best speed 40,000 frightened people could manage. And that was the worst mistake of all, because the choir followed sound, and a fleeing civilization screaming for rescue is the loudest thing in the universe. The drift did not even hurry. It simply followed the noise, patient and certain, and it caught Highholm not because it was fast, but because Highholm could not stop screaming, and the louder they called for help, the more surely they drew the thing that would silence them. The third colony, a frontier world called Marrow's Gate, learned from both. They did not fight and they did not flee. They tried to hide. They cut their main grids and pulled their signals down and went dark, and prayed the choir would pass them by. And it almost worked. It almost worked, and that was the cruelest lesson of the three, because Marrow's Gate had not gone quiet enough. They had left a little. A backup beacon, a few automated stations, the small unconsidered hum of machines no one had thought to silence, and the choir had drifted close, had nearly passed, had felt that faint remaining whisper of a voice, and had turned back, and drunk it, and them. 3 colonies, 80,000 people, 1 terrible week, and from that week humanity learned the 3 things that the rest of the galaxy would spend 60 more worlds failing to learn. You cannot fight it, you cannot flee it, and hiding only works if you are willing to go all the way down to nothing, to leave not one beacon, not one backup, not one unconsidered hum, to make your entire world as silent as the inside of a grave and mean it. Asa Greer remembered the meetings. He had been a young engineer then, junior in the room where the choice was made, and he remembered the maps and the silences and the slow, horrible arithmetic of it. You could not fight the choir with weapons. The humans had learned that in a single week, the week they lost 3 colonies trying, you could not run from it, because it followed sound, and a fleeing civilization is the loudest thing in the universe. You could not hide a single ship from it, because a single ship still hummed, but you could hide a planet, if the planet agreed to die a little. So humanity had made the hardest choice a species can make. It had turned itself off. Every voice, every band, every warm electric whisper, 8 billion people had agreed, in the space of 40 days, to go silent, not to flee, not to fight, to pull every signal down into shielded dark, to put the whole of the species into a sleep that was not death but looked exactly like it, and to wait, to go so quiet that the thing that hunted noise would drift right over them and find nothing to drink, and move on, and look for its meal somewhere louder. It had worked. The choir had come, had hung over the silent world for 2 long months, had found a garden with no voice in it and moved on, disappointed, toward the rim, and the galaxy, watching from a distance, had seen only the silence and written the grave. Asa Greer had been awake for those 2 months too, the first watch, the worst one. He had sat in his concrete room and watched the thinning settle over the silent world, the patch of swallowed stars hanging directly over a planet that held 8 billion held breaths, and he had listened to the choir search. That was a thing he never spoke of, even to the vigil. The choir had searched. For 2 months the pale drift had drifted over the dark world, back and forth, low and patient, looking for the voice it was certain must be there, because no world this large had ever been this quiet, and the choir did not believe in a garden with no song in it any more than the galaxy believed in a humanity that had chosen to die. He had watched the drift hang over the sleeping cities. He had watched it press down low over the silent oceans. Once, in the 2nd month, it had drifted directly over the hill that hid his room, so close that the boards in front of him went strange, and he had sat in the dark with his hand over the only live system he had, the one tiny voice that connected him to the sleeping fleet, and he had not dared to use it, had not dared to make a sound, had not dared to breathe loud enough to be drunk, while the thing that ate worlds searched the dark above his head for the noise it was sure he was making. He had held that silence for 9 hours, alone, with the choir directly overhead, and at the end of the 9 hours the drift had moved on, unsatisfied, and Asa Greer had discovered that he had aged a decade in a night, and that he would never again in his life mistake quiet for peace. That was what it had cost to fool the choir the first time. And the fleet had not yet existed then. There had been nothing in the dark but a sleeping world and one terrified caretaker holding his breath under a hill, and the only weapon humanity had was the discipline to make no sound, while a god of hunger searched the dark above their heads for a voice to drink. But humanity had not gone to sleep empty-handed. You do not turn off a whole civilization without a reason and a plan. While the world went quiet, while the cities dimmed and the voices stopped, humanity had spent the last of its roar on one final, enormous task. It had built. In the cold dark beyond the silent stations, in the shadow of the moon and the long night past Neptune and the deep quiet places the choir's hunger never bothered to taste, humanity had laid down the largest fleet any single world had ever made, not because it wanted to rule, because it had done the arithmetic, and the arithmetic was cruel. The choir could not be killed by 1 ship, or 10, or 100. The humans had tested that in the worst week of their history. The pale drift simply ate whatever you threw at it. But the humans had learned, in that same terrible week, the one thing about the choir that nobody else in the galaxy had lived long enough to learn. The choir was not infinite. It was vast, and it was spread thin, and it wore 1 billion bodies, but 1 billion is a number, and a number can be reached. The pale drift could eat 1,000 shots and not notice. It could not eat 100,000 ships firing at once into every part of it at the same instant, faster than it could spread its hunger to swallow them. There was a threshold, a volume of fire, delivered everywhere at once, past which the choir could not drink fast enough to survive. The humans had calculated that threshold to 4 decimal places, and then they had built the fleet that could deliver it. Building it had been the second impossible thing, and in some ways the harder one. You cannot build 500,000 warships loudly. The choir hunted noise, and a shipyard is the loudest thing a civilization makes, all that cutting and welding and testing pouring out into the dark, a roar that would have drawn the choir straight back the moment it left. So the humans had built in silence too. They had built in the deep cold places past Neptune where the choir's hunger never bothered to drift, in the shadow of the moon, in shielded dark, with every yard and every tool and every test wrapped in the same discipline that had silenced the world. They had built 500,000 warships without making a sound the choir could hear, and they had done it over 9 years, in shifts, with the workers themselves kept quiet, and not one beacon, and not one stray signal, and not one unconsidered hum allowed to escape into the dark, because they had learned at Marrow's Gate what happens to a world that goes quiet, but not quiet enough. Asa Greer had watched the fleet grow on his board over the years, hull by hull, gray shape by gray shape, a count that climbed so slowly at first that he had wondered if he would live to see it finished, and then faster and faster as the silent yards found their rhythm, until the number on his board had passed 100,000, and 200,000, and 3, and finally, in the 7th year, had reached the figure the arithmetic demanded, and a little past it, for margin, because the humans did not bet a species on a sum without margin. 500,000 hulls, and then enough more that even if the choir was larger than they feared, even if the calculation was wrong, even if the worst happened, there would still be enough fire to close the threshold. They had built insurance against being wrong about the most important number any humans had ever calculated, and the insurance alone was a fleet larger than any empire owned, and every hull of it had been built to be silent. That was the part that staggered Tolan most, when he learned it later. It is one thing to build a quiet ship. It is another to build 500,000 of them, each one perfectly silent on every band, each one a hole in the noise exactly the shape of a warship, so that the thing that ate worlds could drift through the whole fleet and taste nothing. The humans had not just built the largest fleet in galactic history, they had built the most disciplined one, a fleet whose first and greatest weapon was not its guns, but its silence, and they had wound that silence into 9 years of patient secret labor in the cold dark, and never once let it slip. 500,000 warships, gray, silent, patient, sleeping in the dark, with their voices pulled down to nothing, waiting for the one signal that would wake them. They had names, all of them, painted on hulls that no one would see for 9 years. And they had a flagship, and the flagship had a name that Asa Greer had said to himself on every one of those 3,000 and some nights, the way other men said prayers. The Vigil Eternal of the Ardmore line. It had taken 9 years for the choir to work its way around the rim and come back into range of a world that would call for help loudly enough to draw it close to the trap. 9 years of Asa Greer awake in his concrete room, listening, watching the dark beads form across the arm, holding the silence, refusing to wake the fleet for any lesser target. Because the fleet could only do this once. The moment it woke, the moment 500,000 hulls lit their voices, the choir would hear the loudest sound the galaxy had ever made, and it would come, all of it, drawn to the noise like a moth to the last fire in the world. You did not spring that trap for a small meal. You sprang it for the whole choir, drawn into one place at one time, with the threshold of fire already waiting. Tarn had called for help. Tarn had drawn the choir close, and the message Asa Greer had sent 9 years ago, the slow, dark message crawling under everything, had finally arrived to tell the Accord fleet the only 4 words that mattered. "We heard you. Hold. Hold," Asa Greer said now, to the empty room, to the 40 Accord ships dying over Tarn, to the 40 million people on the cliffs. Just hold. They're coming. They've been coming for 9 years. He reached out with a hand that shook and pressed the control he had been built to press. The last one, the one that ended the long silence. Across the cold dark beyond the moon, 500,000 voices that had been pulled down to nothing for 9 years came up all at once. The Vigil Eternal of the Ardmore line woke first, the way the eldest in a family wakes first, and its voice rolled out across the system on every band humanity had ever owned, and behind it, in ranks that filled the dark from the orbit of one cold moon to the orbit of another, 500,000 gray hulls opened their eyes and answered. For 9 years, Earth had been the quietest thing in the galaxy. In one heartbeat it became, once again, the loudest. And this time the noise was not a city talking to itself. This time the noise was a fleet, fully awake, saying a single thing in 500,000 voices at once. "We are still here." Watch Marshal Tolan Vesh, 200 light-minutes away over the dying world of Tarn, did not hear that signal for a long time. Light is fast, but it is not instant, and the distance between a grave and a hope is measured in the patience of physics. He would stand on his bridge and watch the lights come on around Earth on his scope, and he would not understand for hours what he was seeing. But the choir understood at once, because the choir did not hear with ears or wait on light. The choir drank sound the way a root drinks water, instantly, everywhere it touched, and the moment 500,000 human voices came up at once, the pale drift over Tarn felt it across the whole arm like a struck nerve. Tolan saw it happen on the scope and could not make his mind accept it. The thinning over Tarn, the patch of swallowed stars that had been crawling toward the cliff cities for 11 days, simply stopped. The pale drift, which had never once in 60 worlds turned away from a meal, went still, and then, slowly, like a vast blind animal lifting its head, it began to turn. Away from Tarn, away from the 40 million people who had already started to grieve themselves, toward the source of the impossible new noise, toward Earth. "It's leaving," the signals officer breathed. "Marshal, it's leaving Tarn. It's all leaving. Every part of it. The whole choir is." She stopped. Her board was lighting up faster than she could read it. "It's pulling together. 60 worlds of it. All the dark beads. They're all moving toward the same point. Toward Earth, Tolan said. Toward Earth, she agreed. It heard them wake up. She looked at him, pale. Marshall, the thing that ate 60 worlds, just turned its whole body toward one planet. They've drawn all of it onto themselves. On purpose. Tolan Vesh stared at the map, at the 60 dark beads coming loose from their worlds and streaming together across the arm toward the blue garden that had pretended to be a grave, and he felt the last of his certainty die, and something new and terrible and bright take its place. They didn't go quiet because they were dying, he said slowly. They went quiet to set a trap, and they kept it shut for 9 years until the prey came close enough to a world worth saving. He turned to his officer. Tarn. They drew the choir here, to Tarn, knowing it would have to pass close to Earth to do it. They used our distress call as bait. His voice caught. They used us as bait, and they're about to spring the trap with their whole species standing on the trigger. The signals officer was very quiet for a moment. Then we should go, she said. Marshall, if the whole choir is gathering over Earth, that's the loudest, deadliest place in the galaxy right now. We have 40 ships. We've been told to hold. We should hold here, over Tarn, where it's safe, and let them. No, Tolan said. He surprised himself with the speed of it. He surprised the whole bridge. He had been a careful man his entire career, a listener, a counter of risks, a writer of the message that started with it cannot be stopped. And now he was looking at a species that had turned itself off for 9 years to save 40 million strangers it had never met, and something in him that had been asleep as long as Earth had been asleep was waking up too. They turned their whole world into a grave to save worlds like Tarn, he said. They did not ask us for anything. They sent us 4 words, and they told us to hold, and we are going to hold, but we are not going to hold here, where it is safe, while the people who saved this world stand alone in front of the worst thing the galaxy has ever made. He straightened. He felt taller than he had in 9 years. Helm. Set a course for Earth. Best speed. All 40 ships. Marshall, the signals officer said. The message said hold. The message said hold, Tolan agreed. It did not say hold over here. He almost smiled. We are going to go hold next to them. Send the order to the fleet. We are going to Earth. The watch cruiser Sevenfold Patience came about, and 40 Accord ships came about behind it, and a fleet that had arrived at Tarn certain it was about to die there turned instead toward the gathering dark over the human world, to stand beside a species it had buried 9 years too early. It was the bravest thing Tolan Vesh had ever ordered. It was, he would say later, the proudest, and it would turn out, in the way these things turn out, to matter not at all to the outcome of what was coming, and to matter more than anything else in the galaxy, to the one old man in a concrete room who had spent 9 years alone, listening for any voice that would choose to stand instead of run. Because Asa Greer heard the 40 Accord ships turn toward Earth. He heard their engines light, heard their formation, heard the small, brave fleet of strangers point itself at the worst place in the galaxy on purpose. And for the first time in 9 years, the old caretaker of a silent world put his shaking hands over his face and wept, because he had been so certain, for so long, that no one out there would ever choose to come. He pulled himself together. There was no time. The choir was gathering, 60 worlds of pale hunger streaming together across the arm, and the trap that had taken 9 years to set was about to close on the largest meal the hollow choir had ever been offered. And the meal was a planet, and the planet was his, and standing between it and the dark were 500,000 gray ships and one old man, and now, impossibly, 40 strangers who had decided that holding meant holding together. Asa Greer wiped his eyes. He opened a channel he had not opened in 9 years, a channel that reached only one place, the bridge of the vigil eternal of the Ardenmore line, where a thing that was part machine and part the saved-down memory of 1,000 human officers had been sleeping, waiting, holding, for exactly this. Vigil, he said. Caretaker Greer, the long silence is over. You are cleared to wake the fleet to full. The choir is coming, all of it. We have a guest fleet inbound, 40 Accord hulls, friendly. Do not fire on them. Keep them alive." He took a breath. "And we have a world behind us, with 8 billion sleepers in it, who trusted us to be the ones who stayed awake." His old voice steadied into something flat and hard and certain. "So let's be worth it. Light the fleet. Open the trap. Bring them all the way in." The Vigil Eternal of the Ardenmore line answered him in the patient tone he had listened to alone for 9 years, and the patience in it had finally, after all that waiting, turned to something else. "Caretaker," the great ship said, "the fleet is awake, the trap is open, bring them in." And out past the moon, 500,000 gray hulls turned as one toward the gathering dark, lit every voice they had, and began, deliberately, to make themselves the loudest thing the galaxy had ever known, so that the worst thing the galaxy had ever made would come, all of it, into the one place where it could finally be reached. The choir took 4 hours to gather, and watching it gather was the worst 4 hours of Tolan Vesh's life. He watched it from the bridge of the Sevenfold Patience as his 40 ships raced toward Earth, and he watched the 60 dark beads come loose from their dead worlds and stream together across the arm. And as they came together they grew, and as they grew, the stars behind them went out in greater and greater numbers, until the thing that had been 60 separate thinnings was one vast thinning, a wound in the sky bigger than any structure the galaxy had ever built, a patch of absolute swallowed nothing wide enough to hide a star system inside. That was the hollow choir hole. 60 worlds of hunger gathered into one place for the first time in the history of its long, quiet feeding. No empire had ever seen it like this. No empire had ever survived being close enough to try. It hung over the human system like a held breath, like the inside of a mouth, and it was beautiful in the way that very large, terrible things are beautiful, and Tolan understood with a cold drop in his belly exactly how much the humans had been willing to risk. They had drawn all of it, every last pale thread of the thing that 8 worlds, gathered in one place, over their own home, with 8 billion sleepers behind them. If the trap failed, if the arithmetic was wrong by even a little, the choir would not eat one world tonight. It would eat humanity, completely, and then it would eat Tarn, and then it would have learned that even silence could be a lie, and nothing in the galaxy would ever be safe from it again. The humans had bet their whole species and the lives of 60 more worlds on a calculation made 9 years ago in the dark. "Marshal," his signals officer said softly, "the human fleet is hailing us." Tolan's mouth went dry. "Put it through." The voice that filled the bridge was the patient tone he had heard before, the one 9 years old, except that now it was live and close, and it spoke the Accord's own language, slowly, carefully, like a thing that had spent 9 years learning it from old intercepts in case this day ever came. "Accord fleet," said the Vigil Eternal of the Ardenmore line, "this is the human flagship. You were told to hold. You did not hold." A pause. "You came instead. We see you. We will not forget it." Tolan found his voice. "Human flagship, this is Watch Marshal Tolan Vesh of the Sevenari Accord. We came because you saved Tarn, and we will not let you stand alone." He swallowed. "Tell us where you need us. Tell us how to fight it. We have 40 ships." There was a silence on the line, and in the silence Tolan had the strange sense of being studied by something very old and very patient and not unkind. "You cannot fight it," the Vigil said, and there was no cruelty in it, only fact. 40 ships cannot fight it. 400 could not. We learned that 9 years ago, in the worst week we ever had, and we paid for the lesson with 3 colonies and everyone on them. A pause. "It cannot be fought, Marshal. It can only be reached, and to reach it you need a number we spent 9 years building, and a threshold we calculated to 4 places, and the patience to hold every gun silent until the exact instant the whole of it is inside the kill volume and not one thread is left outside to flee and breed again." The patient voice hardened, just slightly. "If we fire too soon, even a little, part of it escapes, and in 50 years there is a new choir, and 60 more worlds die, and humanity went quiet for nothing. So we will not fire too soon. We will hold. We will let it come all the way in. We will let it begin to feed. And you, Marshal, with your 40 brave ships, are going to do the hardest thing in war, which is to stand inside the mouth of the thing that eats worlds, and not run, and not fire, and wait for the word. Toland looked around his bridge, at the faces of his crew, pale in the light of the great wound in the sky. "And when does the word come?" he asked. "When the trap is full," the vigil said. "Hold your fire, Marshal, hold your nerve, and keep your ships close to ours. Whatever happens, stay close to the gray hulls. You will understand why when the moment comes." The line went quiet, and the choir came on. It reached the human fleet the way the tide reaches a shore, slow and total and without malice. And the first thing Toland learned about being inside the mouth of the thing that ate worlds was that it was not dark. He had expected dark. Everyone expected dark, because from a distance the choir was a hole in the sky. But from inside, the pale drift was all around them, a billion soft bodies thin as smoke and faintly luminous, like dust in a sunbeam, like the inside of a cloud lit from somewhere far away. It was almost gentle. It drifted between the ships, around the hulls, soft and slow and curious, and where it touched a ship it began, very quietly, to drink. "Marshal," his engineering officer said, and his voice had gone tight. "We're losing signal, internal comms, the reactor hum, it's eating our sound. All of it. We're going," he swallowed. "We're going quiet." It was happening to all 40 Accord ships. Toland could feel it, a strange muffling, the bridge going hush, the constant background voice of a living ship fading band by band as the choir drank it. This was how worlds died, not in fire, in this. In a slow, gentle silencing, a hand laid softly over the mouth of a civilization until there was no voice left, and then no warmth, and then no anything. 40 million people on Tarn would have died exactly like this, quietly, while they slept, never knowing the moment their world stopped being a world. It was the most frightening thing Toland had ever felt, and it was made worse by how soft it was. Some primitive part of him wanted to scream just to prove he still could. And then the pale drift reached the gray human hulls, and Toland learned the second thing. The choir could not drink the human ships. He watched it on the scope and could not understand it. The pale bodies drifted up against the gray hulls of the Vigil Eternal and its 500,000 siblings, and they touched them, and they tried to feed, and nothing happened. The human ships made no sound for the choir to eat. Not the reactor hum, not the comms chatter, not the warm electric whisper that every other living machine in the galaxy poured into the dark without knowing it. The gray hulls were silent in a way no machine should be able to be silent. Silent at the root, silent on every band, perfectly and deliberately quiet, and the choir drifted against them and found nothing to drink and grew confused and curious and pressed closer, looking for the voice it could hear and could not find. 9 years, Toland breathed, understanding. They didn't just turn off the planet, they built the whole fleet to be silent. Every ship. To it, they're not even there. They're a hole the same shape as a ship. "Keep your ships close to the gray hulls," his signals officer said softly, repeating the Vigil's words back to him. "That's why, Marshal, the human ships are quiet enough that the choir can't taste them. If we stay close, tucked in among them, our noise gets lost in their silence. They're hiding us. 40 loud ships, hidden inside 500,000 silent ones." Toland gave the order, and his 40 ships pulled in tight against the gray hulls, and one by one, as they nestled into the silence of the human fleet, the dreadful drinking feeling faded, the muffling stopped, and the choir, baffled, drifted past them looking for voices it could no longer find. The humans had made a place inside the mouth of the World Eater where a loud thing could be safe. They had made it for themselves, and the first time they ever used it for anyone else, they used it for 40 strangers who had been told to hold and had come instead. Toland walked his bridge while the choir gathered, and he made himself look at the gray hulls all around him, and the longer he looked, the more he saw. The human ships were not beautiful. That surprised him. He had imagined, in the early hours, that a fleet built in secret over 9 years by the species that roared loudest in the arm would be a fleet of wonders, all light and edges and pride. It was nothing of the kind. The gray hulls were plain, blunt, square-shouldered things, built without a single line that did not serve a purpose, without a single light that did not need to be there, without a single sound that could be silenced and was not. They were the least vain machines Tolan had ever seen. Every part of them said the same thing, which was that they had been built not to be admired, but to be enough, and that the people who built them had cared about exactly one outcome and nothing else. And they were so quiet. That was the thing his crew could not stop talking about, in low voices, in the long hours of the gathering. Tolan's own ship was a living thing, full of the small, constant noises of a working hull, the breath of the air plant, the murmur of the drive, the hum that meant the reactor was awake. The human ships made none of it. They drifted in the dark in perfect silence, 500,000 of them, and if you did not see them on the scope, you would never have known they were there at all. And Tolan understood that this was the whole point, that the humans had spent 9 years and the labor of a species teaching 500,000 warships to be, to the thing that ate sound, as silent and as absent as the grave their world had pretended to be. It was the most patient act of war he had ever imagined. To win against a thing that hunted noise, the humans had not built louder guns. They had built quieter ships. They had answered hunger with discipline, and the discipline was 9 years long, and it was wound into every gray plate of every gray hull around him, and it was the reason that 40 loud Accord ships could now hide inside it like ducklings inside a flock. The choir poured in. Hour by hour, more of it arrived. Drawn by the 500,000 voices the humans were deliberately pouring into the dark, all the noise of a whole woken fleet, the loudest sound the galaxy had ever made, ringing out across the system like a struck bell to call the hunger home. The pale drift filled the space between the gray ships, around the gray ships, through the gray ships, the whole 60-world body of it gathering tighter and tighter into the kill volume the humans had marked 9 years ago and never told the galaxy about. And the gray ships held their fire. That was the part Tolan could not stop watching. 500,000 warships, every gun charged, the worst thing in the galaxy drifting all around them and through them, soft and pale and feeding on the noise they were making on purpose, and not one human ship fired. Not one. They held. They poured out noise, and held their guns, and let the thing that ate worlds settle over them like a tide coming in. Closer and closer, fuller and fuller, and Tolan realized he was watching the most disciplined act of war he had ever seen or imagined. 500,000 ships standing perfectly still inside the mouth of death, waiting for a single word. "How full does it have to be?" he whispered. "All of it," the vigil answered, on the open line, hearing him. "Every thread. The moment one thread is left outside, we have failed, and it breeds again. So we wait until the last of it is in. We wait until it is certain it has found us. We wait until it begins, truly begins, to feed on the noise and forgets that anything in the universe could ever hurt it." A pause, and in the patient voice was something almost like grief. "It has eaten 60 worlds, Marshal. It does not believe in being hunted. It has never once, in all its long feeding, been the prey. We are going to give it that experience exactly once." The hardest part, Tolan would say afterward, was not the fear he had expected. The hardest part was the patience, and the way the patience worked on a person hour after hour, the way it asked you to stand still inside the mouth of the worst thing in the galaxy and do nothing, again and again, while every instinct in your body screamed that doing nothing was death. 3 times during the long gathering, his crew nearly broke. Not from cowardice, from the opposite, from the unbearable wrongness of holding fire while the thing that ate worlds settled over them and fed. The first time, a young gunnery officer, watching the pale drift pour through the gaps in the formation, had his hand on the firing control before he caught himself, his whole body shaking with the need to do something, anything, rather than stand and let it come. Tolan had crossed the bridge and put his own hand over the young officer's and held it there, and said nothing, because there was nothing to say, and after a moment the young officer had let out a breath and taken his hand away, and they had gone back to the unbearable work of waiting. The second time, it was the whole bridge at once, when the drift grew thick enough that the gray hulls around them began to dim on the scope, swallowed in pale luminous fog, and for a few terrible minutes it seemed that the human fleet had simply vanished, that Toland's 40 ships were alone inside the mouth of the World Eater, with no silence left to hide in. The Vigil's voice had come through then, calm and unhurried. "Hold, Marshal. We are here. We have not moved." And slowly the gray hulls had resolved again out of the fog, exactly where they had always been, having held their station and their fire through it all, without the smallest waver. And the third time was the worst, because the third time there was no enemy action at all. It was simply the weight of the thing, the accumulated hours of standing inside death and doing nothing, and an old sensor technician near the back of the bridge had begun, very quietly, to weep, not from fear, but from the sheer impossible strain of it, and Toland had gone to her and crouched beside her chair and said, "Look at the gray ships," and she had looked, and he had said, "They have been doing this for 9 years. 9 years of holding. We have done it for 4 hours and it is breaking us. Imagine doing it for 9 years, alone, in the dark, on a sum you cannot check." And the old technician had wiped her eyes and looked at the silent patient hulls all around them, and found, somewhere, the strength to hold a little longer, because the humans were holding, and the humans had been holding longer than she could imagine, and shame is a poor reason to be brave, but endurance borrowed from someone braver is a fine one. The hours passed. The choir gathered. The wound in the sky shrank, as the pale drift pulled itself in from across the whole arm, tighter and tighter, into the space the humans had prepared, until at last there was no thinning out among the distant stars anymore, no dark beads, no stray threads. All of it was here, all of it was in, 60 worlds of hunger, gathered for the first and only time into one place, settled over 500,000 silent ships, feeding greedily on a noise it could hear and a fleet it could not taste, certain, after 60 easy meals, that the universe held nothing that could ever bite back. On Earth, in his concrete room, Asa Greer watched the kill volume fill to the last thread and felt something he had not felt in 9 years. He felt the long silence ending. Not the quiet of the planet, the silence inside himself, the held breath of a man who had waited 3,000 nights to find out whether the arithmetic was right. "Vigil," he said. "Report. How much of it is inside the volume?" "All of it, caretaker," the great ship said. "Every thread. For the first time in its existence, the entire hollow choir occupies a single bounded space, and it is feeding, and it is certain, and it does not believe it can be reached." Asa Greer closed his eyes. Behind him, in the dark, 8 billion sleepers. Beyond them, 40 strangers who had chosen to come. Beyond them, the world called Tarn, and the 60 dead worlds, and every world the choir would have eaten if humanity had decided, 9 years ago, that it was easier to run. "Then we were right to wait," the old man said. "All 9 years of it, we were right." He opened his eyes, and they were clear and hard and certain, the eyes of the one who stayed awake. "Vigil eternal. The trap is full. The volume is closed. Every gun is yours." His old voice did not shake at all. "Light it up." 500,000 guns fired in the same 10,000th of a second, and Toland Vesh finally understood what a threshold was. He had thought, in his ignorance, that the humans would shoot the choir the way you shoot anything, a barrage, a storm, a great rolling wave of fire crashing into the enemy and tearing it apart. He had been wrong about that the way he had been wrong about everything else tonight. The humans did not fire a wave. A wave has a front and a back. A wave gives the thing it hits a moment, however small, to feel it coming, to flinch, to flee, to spread its hunger into the gap and drink the fire down. The choir had eaten waves. The choir had eaten everything anyone had ever thrown at it, because everything anyone had ever thrown at it had arrived in time, and time was the one thing the choir was faster than. So the humans did not give it time. 500,000 ships fired at the same instant, into every part of the kill volume at once, top and bottom and center and edge. Every thread of the gathered choir struck in the same 10,000th of a second by a gun that had been waiting 9 years for the order. There was no front. There was no back. There was no gap for the hunger to pour into, because there was nowhere in the whole bounded space that was not, in that single instant, on fire. The threshold the humans had calculated to 4 decimal places 9 years ago was not a measure of how hard to hit the choir. It was a measure of how completely, how evenly, how perfectly all at once you had to hit it, so that no part of it ever learned, even for a heartbeat, that it was under attack, because a heartbeat was all the choir had ever needed to win. It did not get the heartbeat. The pale drift that had eaten 60 worlds, that had drunk the voices of a billion people, that had never once in its long quiet feeding been the prey, met the fire of 500,000 silent ships all at once, everywhere, with no warning and no front and no gap, and for the first time in its existence, the hollow choir felt something it had no body designed to feel. It felt pain. Tolan watched it on the scope, and his mind refused, at first, to hold what his eyes were giving it. The vast wound in the sky, the gathered body of the World Eater, did not explode. It was too large and too thin and too strange to explode. Instead it lit. The whole of it, all 60 worlds of pale drift, lit up at once from inside, a single soundless flare wider than a star system, as the fire reached every thread of it in the same instant, and there was nowhere for the hunger to flee, and nothing for it to drink, and no time at all, to do the one thing it had always done before, which was survive. The light lasted 4 seconds. Tolan would learn later that the humans had designed it to last exactly that long, that the threshold of fire was timed to overwhelm the choir's capacity to spread and feed for precisely the window required, and not 1 instant more, because even now, even here, the humans were not wasting a single shot. 4 seconds of the loudest, brightest, most total act of war the galaxy had ever seen, delivered in perfect silence by ships that made no sound, into a thing that lived on sound, and at the end of the 4 seconds the great wound in the sky simply was not there anymore. The stars came back. That was the part Tolan would tell his children about, and his children's children, the part he could never say without his voice going strange. The stars came back. For 11 days he had watched the stars go out behind the thinning over Tarn, and for 4 hours he had watched them go out behind the gathering over Earth. 60 worlds of swallowed light, and now, in 4 seconds, all of it ended, and the stars came back. The whole sky filled in again, point by point, the deep field of the galaxy, returning to a space that had been a whole, and the hollow choir, the thing that ate worlds, the silence at the end of 60 songs, was gone, not retreated, not scattered, gone. Reached, at last, after 9 years of patience, by a number and a threshold and a fleet that had turned itself off to build it. The whole of it, every thread, every world of it, caught in one place at one time and ended in a single breath, so that nothing was left outside to flee and breed and start again. The bridge of the sevenfold patience was completely silent. 40 Accord ships drifted in the place where the mouth of the World Eater had been, tucked in among the gray hulls that had hidden them, and not one of Tolan's crew said a word, because there were no words yet for what they had just watched. It was Tolan who broke the silence, and he did not mean to, and what came out of him was not a report or an order. It was the oldest sound a frightened animal makes when the thing that was hunting it is suddenly, impossibly, dead. He laughed, once, helplessly, half a sob, and then he stopped, ashamed, and looked at the gray hulls all around his ship, 500,000 of them, silent and patient and still, and he understood that they had not moved, not one of them. Through the whole 4 seconds of the end of the World Eater, the human fleet had not advanced, and had not retreated, and had not flinched. They had fired once, all together, and then they had held, exactly as they had held for 9 years, because that was the kind of thing they were. Human flagship, Tolan said. His voice came out rough. Vigil eternal. This is Watch Marshal Vesh. He had to stop and start again. It's gone. The choir. It's gone. It is gone, Marshal, the vigil said. The patient tone had not changed at all. 9 years of waiting, 4 seconds of war, and the great ship sounded exactly as it had sounded before, steady and even and unhurried, a thing that had done what it was built to do and felt no need to crow about it. Every thread, the kill volume is clear, the arithmetic held. How long, Tolan managed. How long did you know it would work? When did you become sure? There was a pause, and in the pause, Tolan heard something he had not expected from a thing so calm, a kind of honesty that cost it something. We were never sure, Marshal, the vigil said quietly. We calculated, we built, we waited, but the choir had never been gathered whole before, and no one had ever fired a threshold like this. And the truth is that no human alive knew, for certain, that it would work until the instant the stars came back. A pause. 8 billion of us went to sleep 9 years ago trusting in arithmetic that had never been tested. That is what it costs to face a thing like this. Not courage in the moment, courage 9 years long, spent in the dark, on a sum you cannot check until the day it is too late to be wrong. Tolan thought about that. He thought about it for a long time, drifting in the clean, restored starlight where the worst thing in the galaxy had been. Your caretaker, he said at last, the voice that woke you. There was a person, one person, awake, all that time. Caretaker Greer, the vigil said, and for the first time something warmed in the patient voice. He stayed awake so the rest of us could sleep. 9 years alone, in a room under a hill, listening, holding the silence, deciding which call was the right one to wake us for. He could have woken us early, for an easier meal, and saved a closer world and let part of the choir escape and doomed 60 worlds 50 years from now. He did not. He held. For 9 years he held, alone, and he wept exactly once, and it was today, when 40 Accord ships turned toward Earth instead of away from it. A pause. He asked me to tell you that, Marshal. He asked me to make sure you knew that the only time the long silence ever broke a man's heart, it broke it because someone chose to stand. Tolan Vesh sat in his command chair in the clean new starlight and found that he could not speak at all. On Earth, in his concrete room under the hill, Asa Greer watched the stars come back on his great dark map and let out a breath he felt he had been holding for 9 years. The dark beads were gone. The wound was gone. The kill volume was clean. The arithmetic, made 9 years ago in a room full of frightened engineers, had held to 4 decimal places, and the worst thing the galaxy had ever made was ended, and behind him in the dark, 8 billion sleepers had not died for nothing. He was very tired. He was 81 years old, and he had been awake for 9 years, and the work he had been built to do was finished, and he felt the tiredness come down on him like a warm, heavy blanket, and he did not fight it. Vigil, he said. His voice had gone soft. It's done. They can wake up now. All of them. Start the wake. Bring the world back. Caretaker, the vigil said gently. It is done. The wake sequence is beginning. 8 billion will open their eyes within the day. A pause. You held the silence, Asa. You held it longer and better than anyone thought a man could. The world is yours again. Come up out of the dark. Come and see the stars. Asa Greer smiled at the map, at the clean sky, at the 40 strange ships still tucked in among the gray hulls, at the whole impossible morning. In a minute, he said. Let an old man sit here in the quiet a minute longer. I've gotten used to it. He closed his eyes. I'll come up and see the stars in a minute. Tell the Accord Marshal, his voice caught. Tell him thank you for coming. He'll never know what it meant to hear someone choose to come. The wake of the sleepers was the part Tolan Vesh was not prepared for, and it was the part that changed him most. He had imagined, when the vigil spoke of 8 billion opening their eyes, some vast and instant thing, a planet, lighting up all at once like a switch thrown. It was nothing like that. It was slow, and it was tender, and it went on for the better part of a day, and Tolan watched the whole of it from his bridge because he could not make himself look away. The world came back the way a body wakes from a deep sleep, by degrees, from the inside out. First, the deep systems, the ones that had kept 8 billion bodies alive in their long shielded rest, brought up the warmth and the air and the slow, careful chemistry of waking. Then the first cities began to glow, not in a blaze but in a scatter, lights coming on here and there across the night side as the sleepers nearest the surface stirred first. Then more and more, the scatter thickening into constellations, the constellations into rivers of light, the rivers into the great blazing webs of a living world, until the night side of Earth, which had been utterly dark for 9 years, was once again a field of human light spread across the dark, every point of it a person opening their eyes for the first time in nearly a decade to a sky their fleet had cleaned of a world eater while they slept. And then, band by band, the world began to speak. Tolan heard it on his signals board, and his signals officer turned the speakers up without being asked, and the whole bridge fell silent to listen. For 9 years Earth had been the quietest thing in the galaxy. Now, slowly, gently, it came back, not all at once, not in the deafening roar of 9 years ago, but in a slow rising tide of voices. The first faint test signals, the first careful broadcasts. A single voice, somewhere on the surface, saying the human words for it is over. We are awake, the sky is clear, and then another voice answering, and another, until the bands that had held a held breath for 9 years filled once more with the warm electric noise of a civilization talking to itself, telling itself the impossible news that it had survived. Tolan Vesh, Watch Marshal of the Sevenari Accord, who had personally signed 40 readings declaring this world a grave, sat on his bridge and listened to a species wake up, and he wept, openly, in front of his crew, and not one of them thought less of him for it, because every one of them was weeping too. They came back, his signals officer whispered. Marshal, they came back. We buried them. The whole galaxy buried them, and they just came back. No, Tolan said softly. He wiped his face and did not care who saw. They were never gone. We just couldn't hear them. He looked at the blazing blue world, alive again, loud again, free again. They were down there the whole time. 8 billion of them, holding their breath in the dark, trusting one old man and a sum and a fleet they couldn't see. For 9 years. His voice broke. And we mourned them. We held a memorial. We told ourselves they went quickly and didn't suffer. And the whole time they were just waiting. Waiting for the right moment to save somebody else. While Tolan watched the world wake, the message of what had happened over Earth was already racing outward across the arm at the speed of light, and it would reach the Accord's High Council before the day was done, and the High Council would not handle it well. Tolan would hear the recording of that session later, and he would keep it, because it taught him something about fear he never forgot. The Council had gathered in emergency, the speakers of 40 species, and the news they received was 3 sentences long, and it broke them. Earth lives. Earth built a fleet of 500,000 warships in secret. Earth has just destroyed the hollow choir in 4 seconds. There had been a silence in the chamber, the recording showed, a long one, and then the fear had started, and the fear had said the things fear always says. They deceived us for 9 years. They built a fleet larger than all of ours together. They have power enough to end any of us, and they hid it, and they lied about being dead, and now they have shown us what their ships can do, and we are at their mercy, and we did not even know it. The speaker for the Krell hegemony had called for an immediate arming of every Accord border. The speaker for the deep core machines had said, in their flat, cold way, that a power that conceals itself for 9 years conceals itself for a reason, and the reason is never mercy. And then an old counselor of the Accord, one who had stood at the human memorial 9 years ago, had asked a single question that the recording preserved forever, and the question had silenced the chamber. If they meant to conquer us, the old counselor had asked, why did they spend the only time they could ever surprise us killing the thing that was killing everyone? Why use the one perfect moment of total surprise, the moment when the whole galaxy still thought them dead, to save 60 future worlds instead of to take 40 present ones? The chamber had no answer. Fear never has an answer to that question, because fear cannot imagine it. And so the Accord had armed its borders anyway, because that is what frightened powers do, and it would take years and the patient work of one watch marshal before the question the old counselor asked finally became the answer the galaxy learned to live by. And out past the moon, 500,000 gray ships that had slept for 9 years began, one by one, to turn their faces back toward the blue world they had been built to protect, and the long silence of Earth ended not in a roar, but in something quieter and far more dangerous to the certainty of 40 empires. It ended in a fleet, fully awake, choosing what to do next. The galaxy spent the next 40 days deciding what to be afraid of, and it chose the wrong thing. Word of Earth traveled at the speed of terror, which is faster than light has any right to be. By the time the human sleepers were waking, by the time the first cities on the blue world were coming back online and 8 billion people were opening their eyes to a sky their ancestors had cleaned of a world eater while they slept, 40 empires already knew 3 facts, and they had drawn from those 3 facts the worst conclusion they could. The first fact was that Earth had not died. It had pretended to die, for 9 years, well enough to fool the entire galaxy. The second fact was that Earth had built, in secret, in silence, in the dark, the largest fleet any single world had ever made. 500,000 warships, more hulls than the 4 greatest empires owned put together. A force that could, if it chose, end any of them in an afternoon. The third fact was that this fleet had just ended the Hollow Choir, the thing that had eaten 60 worlds, the thing that every empire in the arm had privately decided could not be stopped, and it had done it in 4 seconds, and it had not lost a single ship. From these 3 facts the empires concluded that they were about to be conquered. It was, Tolan Vesh thought, listening to the panicked traffic crackle across the arm, exactly the wrong lesson, and it was exactly the lesson empires always learned. They could not imagine a power that large choosing not to rule, because they themselves would never have chosen it. They looked at 500,000 warships and saw their own ambitions made real and pointed back at them. They sent frantic envoys and frantic threats and frantic offers of submission. The Krell hegemony offered Earth 9 of its border systems as tribute. The Ossen Combine offered ships. The great cold machine empires of the deep core offered nothing and instead quietly began to arm, which was their way of being afraid. And the human fleet did nothing. That was the thing the galaxy could not understand, and it was the thing that frightened them most of all. The 500,000 warships did not advance. They did not demand. They did not answer the offers of tribute or the threats of war. They sat in the clean starlight around the waking world, and they waited, patient as they had been patient for 9 years, while the world behind them came back to life. Tolan watched it from the bridge of the sevenfold patience, which had not left. He had been ordered home twice and had ignored both orders, and the Accord High Command had stopped sending them, because the Accord High Command had realized that having the only watch marshal in the galaxy who was trusted by Earth was worth more than having him obey. So Tolan stayed, tucked in among the gray hulls, and he watched, and he learned, and he sent home long, careful messages that began, more and more often, with the words, "They are not what we feared." On the 40th day, the human flagship hailed him. "Marshal Vesh," said the Vigil Eternal of the Ardenmore line. "Caretaker Greer would like to speak with you, in person. He has not left his room under the hill in 9 years, and he says he is not inclined to start, but he says he would like to meet the alien who turned his ships toward Earth instead of away from it, before he is too old to climb the stairs." A pause, and the patient voice warmed. "He is 81, Marshal. He is very tired. I would not make him wait, if I were you." So Tolan Vesh went down to Earth. He went down in a small craft, alone, the first alien to set foot on the human world in its long history, and he came down through a sky that had been dead for 9 years and was now full of light, over cities coming back to life, over green hills and gray seas, and a blue garden that had pretended to be a grave so that worlds it had never met could live. He landed at the foot of a hill that had once been a city, and he walked down into the dark, down concrete stairs worn smooth by one old man's feet, over 9 years of climbing up and down them alone, and at the bottom he found a low room full of soft light and one old human in a chair. Asa Greer was small and bent, and his hands shook, and his eyes were the clearest thing Tolan had ever seen. "You came," the old man said. He did not get up. He could not. Tolan understood. When the message said hold, you came instead. Do you have any idea, Marshal, how long I waited to find out whether anyone out there would do that? 9 years, Tolan said quietly. I think I am beginning to understand exactly how long. Asa Greer laughed, a dry, soft sound, and gestured to a second chair, and Tolan sat, an alien watch marshal and a human caretaker, in a concrete room at the bottom of the world, and for a while they did not talk about fleets, or empires, or the thing that ate worlds. They talked about the silence, about what it was like to be the only awake thing on a sleeping planet for 9 years, about the small noises Asa had learned to listen for, the settling of the building, the wind in the stairwell, the sound of his own breathing, which had been, for 3,000 nights, the only living voice on Earth. The galaxy thinks you're going to conquer them, Tolan said at last. He had to say it. 40 empires. They're arming. They're terrified. They look at your 500,000 ships, and they think they know what comes next. I know what they think, Asa said. He did not seem surprised, or angry, or even very interested. It's what they do, so it's what they think we'll do. That's how it always works. He looked at Tolan with his clear old eyes. Can I tell you a secret, Marshal? The reason we built 500,000 ships instead of 1,000. The threshold, Tolan said. You needed the number to reach the choir all at once. That's the reason we tell people, Asa said. And it's true, but it's not the whole reason. He leaned forward, and his shaking hand found Tolan's arm, and his grip was light and certain. We built 500,000 ships so that no one would ever have to die saving the next world. Do you understand? The choir's gone, but the galaxy is full of things like the choir, slow things, patient things, things too big for one ship or one world to stop. And now there's a fleet big enough that the answer to those things doesn't have to be a sacrifice. It can just be enough. Enough ships, in the right place, at the right time, that nobody has to spend themselves to win. He sat back. We didn't build a fleet to rule the galaxy, Marshal. We built a fleet so that the galaxy would never again have to lose a world just because no one had enough ships to be there in time. Tolan Vesh sat in the quiet room and felt the last of the galaxy's fear curdle into something else in his chest, something that felt a little like shame and a little like hope. They won't believe that, he said. The empires. They'll never believe a power that large could mean it. No, Asa agreed. Not from us. They'll never believe it from us. His clear old eyes settled on Tolan, and there was something in them, a request, the last and largest one the old man would ever make. But they might believe it from you, the marshal who came when the message said hold, the one who stood next to us inside the mouth of the World Eater, the one alien in the whole galaxy who's seen what we do up close and lived to tell it. He smiled, gently. You're going to be very busy for the rest of your life, Watch Marshal Vesh. I'm sorry about that, but somebody out there has to be the voice that tells 40 frightened empires the truth, and it can't be us, and it has to be someone they'll listen to. His grip tightened, just slightly. Will you do it? Will you be the one who tells them what we really are? Tolan Vesh looked at the old man who had stayed awake for 9 years so the rest of his species could sleep, who had held the silence longer than anyone thought a man could, who had wept exactly once, and only because a stranger chose to stand, and he found that the answer had been made in him hours before he was asked, on a bridge over a dying world, the moment he had said the word no instead of the word run. Yes, he said, I'll be the one. Asa Greer closed his eyes, and the smile stayed on his face, and the deep tiredness that had been coming down on him for 40 days settled the rest of the way at last. Good, the old man said softly. Then I think I can rest now. I've been awake an awfully long time. His breathing slowed and evened, the way breathing does when the long watch is finally over and someone else has agreed to keep it. Tell the vigil I held the silence all the way to the end. Tell it I didn't break early. Tell it. His voice was very faint now. Tell it the strangers came. After all that waiting, the strangers chose to come. He was quiet for a moment, and then, in the soft light of the room where he had kept the world for 9 years, with an alien watch marshal holding his shaking hand, Asa Greer, caretaker of Earth, the one who stayed awake, finally went to sleep. Tolan Vesh sat with him a long time. Then he climbed the worn stairs out of the dark, into the light of a world coming back to life, and he carried the old man's last request up out of the silence with him. He kept it for the rest of his life. The history of what came after is long, and most of it is the kind of slow, patient history that does not make songs, which was exactly how the humans wanted it. There was no conquest. There was no empire. The 500,000 warships did not seize a single world, or demand a single tribute, or sit on a single throne. The galaxy waited, breath held, for the hammer to fall, and the hammer did not fall, and slowly, over years, the empires began to understand that it was not going to. Instead, the fleet did the thing Asa Greer had built it to do. When a slow, patient, world-eating thing rose somewhere in the arm, when a plague crawled across a system, or an ancient hunger woke in the deep, or a thing too large for one world to stop began, quietly, to eat the light, the gray ships came. Not all of them, never all of them, just enough to be there in time, enough to reach the thing without anyone having to spend themselves against it. Enough that the answer to the worst things in the galaxy stopped being a sacrifice and became, simply, a sufficiency. Nobody had to die saving the next world. There were finally enough ships that being there was all it took. Tolan saw it for himself, the first time, on a world called Ansa's Crossing, 11 years after Earth woke. Ansa's Crossing was a small world of 9 million, not a cord, not allied to anyone, a place too poor and too far out to matter to the great powers, and a thing had risen in its deep ocean, a slow, cold growth that was pulling the heat out of the world 1 degree at a time, and the world had called for help into the dark expecting, as such worlds always expected, nothing. The gray ships came, 40 of them, no more, because 40 was enough, and Tolan came with them as he often did now. The alien voice that went ahead to tell a frightened world that the fleet it could see in its sky had not come to take anything. He had watched the humans work, and the work was nothing like war. There was no great battle, no threshold of fire, no 4-second flare. The thing on Ansa's Crossing was not the choir, and did not need to be answered the way the choir was answered. The humans studied it for 3 days, and learned it, and then they did to it the precise small thing that would stop it and nothing more, and the world kept its heat, and 9 million people who had expected to freeze in the dark woke up the next morning to a sky with 40 gray ships in it and a sun that was, very slightly, warming again. And then the gray ships left. They did not stay. They did not garrison the world or claim it or ask its gratitude. The people of Ansa's Crossing came out into their streets to thank the fleet that had saved them, and the fleet was already gone, slipped back into the dark on its way to the next call, leaving behind it only a single message in the small tongue of Ansa's Crossing. 4 words that Tolan knew very well by then, the same 4 words that had crawled 9 years through the dark to reach a dying world. We heard you, hold. It was always those 4 words. The humans never sent any others. And Tolan had asked the vigil once, why those? Why always those? And the great patient ship had told him that they were the words Asa Greer had sent to Tarn, the first promise the fleet had ever made to a world it had never met, and that the humans intended to keep sending them until every world in the arm had heard them at least once, so that no one anywhere would ever again look up at a darkening sky and believe, the way the galaxy had believed of Earth for 9 years, that calling for help into the silence was the same as calling into a grave. And the voice that explained them to a frightened galaxy, the voice that told 40 empires the truth about what the 500,000 ships were for, was the voice of Watch Marshal Tolan Vesh of the Sevenari Accord, who had been told to hold and had come instead, and who spent the rest of his long service being the one alien in the galaxy that humanity trusted and the one alien in the galaxy that the empires would believe. He told them the truth 1,000 times, in 1,000 councils, on 1,000 worlds. He told them that Earth had gone quiet, not because it was weak, but because it was patient. He told them that the silence had not been a grave, but a held breath. He told them that the largest fleet in the galaxy had been built not to take worlds but to keep them, and that the proof of it was 60 empty thrones the humans could have taken and had not. And slowly, world by world, empire by empire, the galaxy stopped arming and stopped being afraid and began, cautiously, to do a thing it had not done in a very long time. It began to call for help and expect an answer. The world called Tarn, which had been the bait, raised a small monument on the cliffs above its pale cities. It was not large. The humans had asked them not to make it large. It was a single gray stone, the color of the hulls, and on it were carved no names and no dates and no boasts, only 4 words in the human tongue, and 4 words in the Accord tongue beneath them, the 4 words that had crawled 9 years through the dark to reach a dying world. We heard you. Hold. And far away, on the blue world that had pretended to be a grave, in a low room under a hill, the people of Earth kept one thing exactly as it had been. They did not clear out the concrete room. They did not move the chair. They left it as Asa Greer had left it, the soft light, the great dark map of the arm, the single chair where one old man had stayed awake for 9 years so that 8 billion could sleep and 60 worlds could be saved. They called it the Watch. And every year, on the day the long silence ended, one person came down the worn stairs into the dark and sat in the chair for a single night, alone, listening to the small living sounds of the building and the wind in the stairwell and the quiet of their own breathing, keeping the watch the way it had been kept, so that the species would never forget the cost of the silence or the man who had paid it. It was always quiet down there. It was always dark, but it was never any more lonely, because the whole galaxy knew now that if a voice ever called for help into that dark, something would hear it, and it would not run. It would come,